Good evening. It's Tuesday, September 15th. Firefighters burn off vegetation in the San Gabriel Mountains northeast of Los Angeles today to protect historic Mount Wilson Observatory from a wildfire. Flames from the Bobcat fire get within 500 feet of the observatory. More than 16,600 firefighters on the lines of more than 24 major California wildfires that have scorched 5,000 square miles this year. In the San Francisco Bay Area, the air, choked by smoke, finally begins to clear. Heavy rain and pounding surf driven by Hurricane Sally hit the Florida and Alabama coasts today, as forecasters expect the slow-moving storm to cause historic flooding along the northern Gulf Coast. Meanwhile, the Trump administration appoints a climate change denier to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which provides scientific data on global warming. President Trump presides over the signing of diplomatic deals between Israel and two Gulf state nations, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The president and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu host 700 guests on the White House South Lawn. A Trump health appointee who's accused of trying to muzzle an important scientific publication in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic apologizes for a video in which he says scientists battling the virus are conspiring against President Trump and warns of shooting in America if Trump loses the November election. And a group of progressive Bay Area prosecutors announces the formation of a new group to advocate for criminal justice reform. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. In Oregon, 50 people remain missing in the blazes that tore through the state beginning last week. The death toll stands at 8. Air quality in Portland is the worst among any major city in the world. The fires have destroyed hundreds of homes and forced tens of thousands to flee. Oregon Governor Kate Brown said she's requested a presidential disaster declaration.
We now find ourselves 1 week into this fire event, and without question, our state has been pushed to its limits. It's really hard for all of us to wrap our heads around the devastation that these fires have caused and the pain and the suffering that so many Oregonians have endured over the past few days.
Oregon fire officials say they're concerned about blazes roaring back out of control as winds begin to pick up in the state. Meanwhile, in Southern California, firefighters burned off vegetation in the San Gabriel Mountains northeast of Los Angeles to protect historic Mount Wilson Observatory. The Bobcat fire was within 500 feet this afternoon of the observatory, and crews were waiting for it. The blaze was just 3% contained after growing to more than 64 square miles since breaking out on September 6th. The U.S. Forest Service said firefighters had been taking advantage of favorable weather to conduct firing operations to protect the observatory, nearby broadcast transmitters and communities on foothills below. Mount Wilson rises to an elevation of more than 5,700 feet, about 15 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. Meanwhile, more than 16,600 firefighters are on the lines of more than 24 major California wildfires that have scorched 5,000 square miles this year. Since the outbreak of massive fires on August 15th, there have been 25 fatalities. The SQF complex wildfire burning in Sequoia and Inouye National Forests has ramped up in size and activity over the last few days. The blaze has now consumed over 107,000 acres. Several mountain communities have been overrun by the fire in the foothill town of Three Rivers, A gateway to Sequoia National Park is under a mandatory and voluntary evacuation orders. Yesterday, that park was ordered to close because of the potential fire threat. Vic Bedoyan reports from Fresno.
Growing in size and ferocity, the SQF complex wildfire is burning through mountain communities driven by gusty winds and low humidity. So far, more than 107,000 acres have been laid to waste, with 12% of the perimeter contained. Over concern that the fire may spark over longer distances, the Sequoia National Park gateway town of Three Rivers is being evacuated. Sequoia Park is now closed, but Kings Canyon National Park remains open. Yesterday, the fire made a 12-mile run toward the west, where most of the populated areas are located. Firefighters are working to protect people and structures in its path. They're also prioritizing trailheads, ranger stations, and critical species habitats on the eastern edge of the fire. David Grayhouse is fire behavior analyst with the Great Basin Incident Management Team. He describes how the fire grew so rapidly.
So what has happened over the last couple of days is that we started to get a lot of instability above the fire. And when you get instability above the fire, coupled with the terrain that we were working with on the west side of the fire, plus the wind speeds, plus the low RHs and temperatures, we get a really active day. And what I mean by stability is when you get instability above the fire, it kind of acts like a vacuum. It pulls that smoke up, and when it pulls that smoke up, it pulls the oxygen into the fire. So the higher and faster that smoke column goes, the more oxygen will get into that fire. So basically what the fire was doing over the last couple of days was feeding itself.
Nearly 3,500 people have been evacuated, over 100 structures destroyed, with almost 1,700 others being threatened. Currently, 819 firefighters are on site, and there have been 14 injuries so far. The nearby shotgun fire, which has now spread to over 800 acres, is being monitored by air. There are also two smaller lightning fires in Sequoia National Park. The Moraine at almost 600 acres, now 70% contained, and the Rattlesnake, which has burned over 1,400 acres. The fires are burning in steep, inaccessible terrain with sparse ground fuels and pockets of dead and downed trees. While the size of the fire has increased, there are no current threats to life or property. The park is using a confine and contain full suppression strategy, utilizing natural rock features, existing trails, and other natural barriers as containment lines. The firefighting team was bolstered yesterday with an additional CAL FIRE IMT joining the effort. Vic Bedoyan reporting for the KPFA News and KFCF Radio.
San Francisco Bay Area air quality officials say the region's air quality is beginning to return to normal after 5 days of widespread unhealthy air quality levels. The blanket of wildfire smoke is beginning to dissipate. This morning, the air quality index was under 100 in the moderate range in much of the North Bay in San Francisco, the East Bay, and at the coast, it was between 101 and 150, and at the unhealthy level for sensitive groups. Their sensitive groups include children, the elderly, and people with respiratory problems. It's a big improvement over days past when the entire region measured unhealthy levels. The National Weather Service said smoke concentrations will continue to decline today and through the week as upper-level winds slowly increase ahead of an incoming low-pressure system. Oakland City Council member Rebecca Kaplan today repeated her call for the city to open clean air centers to protect the public health of homeless people and others on days of extreme heat and excessive air pollution. Kaplan noted that on spare the air days, not everyone has access to the resources needed in a challenging situation. Her request was to be heard at today's Oakland City Council meeting. Meanwhile, a meteorologist for the North Complex Butte County fires is warning that some areas of central California blanketed by smoke are not likely to see relief until October. Dan Borsum says it's going to take a substantially strong weather pattern to move all the smoke. He said smoke from dozens of wildfires in the west and throughout California is pooling in the Central Valley, which already has some of California's worst air quality even when wildfires are not burning. and the advocacy director for Sacramento Loaves and Fishes, which works with homeless people, said Sacramento hasn't seen consistent blue skies in weeks. He said people experiencing homelessness have grappled with an unrelenting onslaught of virus, searing heat, and now polluted air they can't escape. Public health experts say the smoke from the wildfires carries dangerous levels of particulate matter. Suzanne Potter reports.
Studies show that firestorms drive a spike in visits to the emergency room, especially among the elderly. Dr. Janice Kirsch is a medical oncologist trained in public health. She says the toxins in the smoke can cause serious damage.
Breathing these particulates can cause or exacerbate heart disease, respiratory disease, lung cancer, and probably other cancers. Prolonged repeated exposure leads to dementia and other behavioral problems in children.
Kirsch says indoor air quality can be almost as bad as it is outdoors, so she advises people to use an air purifier and turn on the air conditioner if you have one to improve circulation. If you have to go outside, she says N95 masks are effective, but the cloth masks people wear for protection against the coronavirus will not stop particulate matter. Groups that fight climate change say the extreme drought, heat, and wildfires are symptoms of a bigger problem. Kathy Durbin with the nonprofit 350 Bay Area says global warming is a public health emergency that demands rapid and transformative solutions.
We have great goals for clean electricity, for cleaner fuels, for cleaner transportation, but we really need to front load those changes and not wait until the goal of 2045. We don't have any time to wait.
In 2018, California lawmakers passed Senate Bill 100, which set a goal of 100% clean energy by 2045. Now advocates say the state has made so much progress that they're calling for a new deadline of 2030. They say the ultimate goal of net zero emissions will depend on getting gasoline-powered cars off the road and on switching homes and businesses to clean energy instead of natural gas. Natural gas is problematic because pipelines often leak methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. For Public News Service, I'm Suzanne Potter.
Heavy rain and pounding surf driven by Hurricane Sally hit the Florida and Alabama coasts today, as forecasters expected the slow-moving storm to dump continuous deluges before and after landfall, possibly triggering dangerous historic flooding along the northern Gulf Coast. The National Hurricane Center expected Sally to remain a Category 1 hurricane with top sustained winds of 80 miles an hour at landfall late today or early tomorrow. The storm's sluggish pace makes it harder to predict exactly where its center will strike. The hurricane's slow movement exacerbates the threat of heavy rain and storm surge. Sally remained dangerous even after losing power, its fiercest winds having dropped considerably from a peak of 100 miles an hour yesterday. The storm has moved away from New Orleans, which had been in its path. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey urged people living on the Gulf Coast to evacuate.
Hurricane Sally is not to be taken for granted. We are looking at record flooding, perhaps breaking historic levels. And with rising water comes a greater risk for loss of property and life.
Sally is centered about 110 miles south of Mobile, Alabama, 55 miles east of the mouth of the Mississippi River. President Trump issued emergency declarations for parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama yesterday. The declaration frees up funds for emergency services and response. A climate change denier has been appointed to a key position at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which produces climate research. The Washington Post reports that David Legates is affiliated with the Heartland Institute, a free market think tank funded in part by the fossil fuel industry that supports research arguing that human-caused climate change is not a serious threat. The Washington Post quoted an official at NOAA who said they hadn't heard about the appointment and calling it a midnight hire over the weekend. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. A Trump health appointee who is accused of trying to muzzle an important scientific publication in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic apologized today for a separate video in which he reportedly says scientists battling the virus are conspiring against President Donald Trump and warned of shooting in America if Trump loses the election. An administration official said Michael Caputo, the top spokesman for the Department of Health and Human Services, apologized to his staff for the Facebook video. The department is standing by Caputo, at least so far, in the face of calls by congressional Democrats for his dismissal and for the resignation of his boss, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. While working in a top position in the HHS for the Trump administration, Caputo has sought to change, delay, suppress, and retroactively edit scientific reports on COVID-19 by the Centers for Disease Control that were deemed unflattering to President Trump. And he's accused CDC scientists of sedition. Yesterday, as news of that activity broke, Caputo posted on Facebook video in which he claimed without evidence that there are hit squads being trained all over the country to mount armed opposition to a second term for President Trump. You understand that they're going to have to kill me, and ultimately I think that's where this is going, Caputo said. He also said his physical health was in question and his mental health has definitely failed. Caputo was named the top HHS spokesman in April during a tense period in relations between the White House and HHS Secretary Alex Azar, when Trump loyalists suspected Azar was not being supportive enough of Trump's management of the coronavirus crisis. On a taxpayer-funded podcast earlier this summer, Caputo accused Democrats and the media of not wanting a coronavirus vaccine until after the elections in order to defeat Trump. The department supported Caputo with a statement calling him a critical, integral part of the president's coronavirus response, leading on public messaging as Americans need public health information to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic. No immediate statement from the White House. On Capitol Hill, Senator Patty Murray of Washington called on Azar to fire Caputo, accusing the spokesman of trying to interfere with CDC reports. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called on Azar himself to resign, citing interference with the CDC as one example of what he termed the administration's failures. Caputo is an unswerving Trump loyalist. His recent book, The Ukraine Hoax, claimed the president's phony impeachment was rooted in a vast conspiracy. Caputo began his political career in Russia, working for Boris Yeltsin. In 2000, he went to work for Gazprom Media. His job? Gussying up the image of Vladimir Putin in the West. A friend of political saboteur Roger Stone, Caputo worked for Trump's presidential campaign in 2016. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said today that she will keep the House of Representatives in session until representatives can reach a coronavirus relief bill. Pelosi was interviewed on CNBC.
We are committed to staying here until we have an agreement that meets the needs of the American people.
During a private conference call with House Democrats today, Pelosi told members that scaling back the party's position on stimulus is a non-starter. The U.S. House of Representatives is scheduled to be out of session starting early next month while its members run for re-election. House Democrats have expressed concerns about the need for a new stimulus bill going into election season. Democrats have pushed a $2.2 trillion aid package, an amount that Republicans argue is too costly. Senate Republicans attempted to move what they called a skinny bill through the Senate last week, but were blocked by Democrats. Pelosi has maintained for weeks that she would reject and he scaled back efforts. Republicans have asked for protections from COVID-related lawsuits for businesses. Democrats have asked for relief for overstretched state and local government budgets. Israel today signed a diplomatic pact with 2 Gulf Arab states at a White House ceremony. The President Donald Trump declared will mark the dawn of a new Middle East, casting himself as an international peacemaker at the height of his re-election campaign. The bilateral agreements formalize the normalization of Israel's already thawing relations with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, in line with their common opposition to Iran. But the agreements do not address the decades-long conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, who view the pacts as a stab in the back from their fellow Arabs and a betrayal of their cause for a Palestinian state. Hundreds of people massed on the sun-washed South Lawn at the White House to witness the signing of agreements in a festive atmosphere, little marked by the coronavirus pandemic. Attendees did not practice social distancing. Most guests didn't wear masks. Both Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the assembly from a White House balcony above. Neither Netanyahu nor Trump mentioned the Palestinians in their remarks, but both the United Arab Emirates and Bahraini foreign ministers spoke of the importance of creating a Palestinian state. Simon Marks reports.
They normalise ties between those two countries and Israel, bringing to an end decades of enmity, although never actual war. President Trump hailed the Abraham Accords as a turning point in the history of the region.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these 3 countries, we take a major stride toward a future in which people of all faiths and backgrounds live together in peace and prosperity.
This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have prayed for peace. For decades, the Jewish state has prayed for peace. And this is why today we're filled with such profound gratitude.
Today's agreement is an important first step, and it is now incumbent on us to work urgently and actively to bring about the lasting peace and security our peoples deserve. A just, comprehensive, and enduring 2-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will be the foundation, the bedrock of such peace.
President Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu and Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, the Bahraini foreign minister there. President Trump says as many as 5 other Gulf Arab states could soon sign similar agreements with Israel. And he predicted if he's re-elected, Iran will seek an agreement within 1 week of his election win. Simon Marks, Washington.
The so-called Abraham Accords and the bilateral agreement signed by Israel and Bahrain fell short of more detailed formal treaties that are the diplomatic norm. Both documents were made up of general statements pledging to advance diplomacy, mutual cooperation, and regional peace. Meanwhile, Palestinian leaders said they regarded the deals as treason, said that Arab states have stabbed them in the back. Rami Almagari reports from Gaza.
Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, West Bank and East Jerusalem expressed outrage over the new Arab-Israeli agreement. In the Gaza Strip, Palestinian armed resistance factions fired a few crudely produced rockets into southern Israel. Israeli media sources say 2 Israelis were wounded. Hussein Nail is a resident of the central Gaza Strip.
Not only Emirate and Bahrain, but some other Arab countries will follow on such steps, as those countries only seek consent by both Trump and Israel.
On social media, Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories posted angry quotes and pictures condemning normalization between Israel and the 2 Arab Gulf states. Recently, all Palestinian factions, including the Islamist Hamas Party and Fatah Party of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, agreed to form a new popular resistance bloc to respond to new Israel-Arab deals. Madeleine Al-Ahmed is a social media activist and a single mother in her late 30s.
My opinion is that we Palestinians should first embark on an internal reform. Once our internal situation is reformed, we might then be able to cast our criticism against any normalization.
The Israeli deal between Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates comes at a time Israel and Palestinians are farther than ever from a two-state solution, which would establish an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Months prior to the deal, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his government would annex large parts of the West Bank after Washington had recognized the entire city of Jerusalem as the unified capital of the State of Israel. But he appeared hesitant to go forward with a plan right away. Still, the UAE defended its deal with Israel by claiming it had won a guarantee that Israel would hold its planned annexation. Talal Okel is a Gaza-based political analyst. He says that the agreement is a part of what President Trump had called the deal of the century, which Palestinians have already rejected.
What kind of interest can Palestinians maintain out of this deal? The deal itself mainly suggests, as explained by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, peace in return for peace, and that Palestinians can live well without obtaining any political gains.
For Pacifica Radio, KPFA, I am Rami El-Mighari in Gaza.
An Israeli court handed down 3 life sentences to a Jewish extremist convicted in a 2015 arson attack that killed a Palestinian toddler and his parents. The 2015 attack came amid a wave of vigilante attacks on West Bank Palestinians by suspected Jewish extremists. Earlier this year, the court found Amraham Ben Uliel guilty of murder for the killing of 18-year-old Ali Dawashba by firebombing his home in the West Bank village of Duma. The toddler's mother and father also died of their wounds. 4-year-old Ahmad survived the attack. He's now 9 years old and lives with his grandparents. The court said Ben Uliel's actions were meticulously planned and stemmed from the radical ideology he held and racism. It said the punishment was close to the maximum penalty prescribed by the law. Ben Uliel's wife said he would appeal to the Israeli Supreme Court. A group of progressive San Francisco Bay Area prosecutors today announced the formation of a new group to advocate for criminal justice reform. The new Prosecutors Alliance of California comes as the nation faces a debate over racism and police practices, and as the issue of law and order has become an issue of contention in the presidential election campaign. Christopher Martinez reports.
The failure of several high-profile police and criminal justice reform bills in Sacramento left many reform advocates disappointed this fall, frustrated by the power of police unions and law enforcement groups at the state capitol. Now, a group of progressive prosecutors, past and present, from the Bay Area, want to change the balance of power with a new law enforcement group focused on advocating for change. Christine Soto de Berry is director of the new group.
We are forming the Prosecutors Alliance of California to be a new voice, a new law enforcement association that can speak to the importance of reform and the ability to maintain our safety while we do so. This is a first of its kind association in the country because of its focus on reform.
DeBerry says for too long, law enforcement associations have falsely claimed that reform and public safety cannot coexist. She says there's a need for advocacy by reform-minded law enforcement leaders. The group's charter members include district attorneys from San Francisco, Contra Costa County, and San Joaquin County. The group also includes former San Francisco District Attorney George Gascon, who is in the race to become Los Angeles County District Attorney in the November election. Gascon calls this an historic moment.
We must stop law enforcement from continuing to dominate the message around public safety and fear-mongering that does nothing for public safety, that is only lining their pockets and continuing to increase their political authority and their political power.
Gascon's successor as San Francisco DA is Chesa Boudin. He says he's excited to be part of redefining the way law enforcement leaders advocate for change. He says he wants policies to be driven by data, not fear, and by healing, not retribution.
For decades, law enforcement unions and the voices that have dominated and defined the positions that law enforcement groups take in Sacramento and in local policymaking processes have been absolutely overwhelmed by fear-mongering, by often dishonesty and manipulation of data, and by exploitation of victims and their suffering. It's time for a change. It's time for law enforcement voices to come together and advocate for policies that actually make us safer, that are rooted in data, that are rooted in communities, that are rooted in healing and supporting each other rather than tearing each other down.
The advocates say they see their organization as an alternative to groups like the California District Attorneys Association and other law enforcement associations they see as opposing reform. And the prosecutors in the new alliance are serious about wanting reform.
Currently, there exist two different systems of criminal justice, one for all of us and one of those for law enforcement.
Tori Verber Salazar is San Joaquin County's district attorney. She resigned from the California District Attorneys Association in January, calling it out of touch for opposing state criminal justice reform measures. She says the nation has to have difficult conversations, has to look at issues like systemic racism, has to look at the role of prosecutors and law enforcement, and has to look at making changes. She sees the new Prosecutors Alliance as a way for prosecutors to welcome a broader array of voices, rather than the narrower law and order voices that dominate traditional law enforcement organizations.
But the answer can't be to go to the past when the past has proven overwhelmingly it did not work. It drove crime up. So you can't go to that clutch of, well, we'll just go to the old days when things were better, because they weren't. You have to look at the data and do the history and the research, and you'll see that they weren't. And so you can't go to that. And you can't go to fear-mongering. You cannot scare and traumatize our public.
The advocates say their group should broaden the debate over criminal justice reform and provide political cover for elected officials who are wary of opposing powerful lobbying groups like police unions. They say they're already seeing interest from some reform-minded prosecutors in other states like Virginia and Missouri. Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martinez.
The city of Louisville, Kentucky will pay several $1 million to the mother of Breonna Taylor and says it will institute police reforms as part of a settlement of a lawsuit announced today from Taylor's family. The settlement reportedly would be the largest sum paid by the city for a police misconduct case. Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, filed a lawsuit alleging that police used flawed information when they obtained a no-knock warrant to enter the black woman's apartment in March. The suit accused 3 Louisville police officers of blindly firing into Taylor's apartment the night of the March raid, striking Taylor several times. Her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, was in the apartment with her and fired a single shot that struck an officer in the leg. Kenneth Walker said he didn't hear police announce themselves and said he thought he was defending against an intruder. The Los Angeles County Sheriff has criticized elected officials, sports figures, and civic leaders, charging they are fanning the flames of hatred. Sheriff Alex Villanueva made his remarks after the weekend ambush of 2 deputies who were in their parked police vehicle when a man walked up to the passenger's side and fired multiple rounds. The deputies were struck in the head and critically wounded, but both are expected to recover. Villanueva said people are fanning the flames of hatred and turning up the volume when we don't need it. We need it to be turning it down, he said. You're listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno online at kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast, airs each night at 6 with a half-hour edition at the same time on the weekend. And it's archived online. You can listen to it whenever you like. It's kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle. Joe Biden made his first trip to Florida as the Democratic presidential nominee today, while his campaign acknowledged concerns about his appeal with Latinos. That voting bloc could be key to victory in a close race against President Trump in a pivotal battleground state like Florida. Biden was to hold a round table with veterans in Tampa before marking Hispanic Heritage Month. Latinos make up 1/5 of eligible voters. A recent NBC Marist poll found Latinos in the state about evenly divided between Biden and Trump. Democrat Hillary Clinton led Trump by a 59% to 36% margin among Latinos in the same poll 4 years ago. And Trump won Florida by about 1 percentage point. A Texas group targeting Latino voters under the age of 35 has ramped up its grassroots efforts to get them registered and out to vote in the November election. Roz Brown reports.
Antonio Arellano leads JOLT, a group dedicated to increasing voter participation and defending democracy. He believes young Latinos have been dehumanized as the state undergoes a shift that threatens the status quo. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates the Hispanic population in Texas could surpass its white population as soon as 2021. Arellano thinks it's contributing to voter suppression in Texas.
Voter intimidation is at an all-time high, and our Latino community has been targeted and terrorized for the past 4 years while this administration has been in power.
During the pandemic, a record number of Texans registered to vote in this year's primary runoff election, about 2.4 million more than 4 years ago. But Texas also led the southern states last year in closing the most polling stations, making it more difficult for people to vote. To reach younger voters, JOLT is emphasizing digital outreach with mass text messaging to peers, virtual volunteer hours on Zoom, and a new website that helps people register to vote almost entirely online. Arellano says coronavirus pandemic disparities among minority populations have made younger Latinos acutely aware that healthcare access is a critical factor.
Young Latinos are literally watching their grandparents, their parents, and their loved ones die due to the lack of access to affordable health care. And they're going to demand justice at the ballot box, more now than ever before due to COVID-19.
Even before the pandemic, Texas had the highest rate and largest number of people without health insurance in the country. In addition to health care, Arellano says immigration reform is a major concern. 1 in every 3 Texans is an immigrant or a child of immigrants. Support for this reporting was provided by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. For Public News Service, I'm Roz Brown.
According to state data released today, California's 7-day positivity rate, comparing COVID-19 infections to the overall number of virus tests conducted, was 3.3%. The average number of daily cases has been falling for weeks, and the most recent 7-day figure was 3,157, a 27% drop from the previous week. But virus cases in San Diego County have trended higher recently and are now above the statewide average. That uptick means San Diego County, the state's second largest, could have to shut down some recently reopened businesses. The issue was up for discussion among San Diego County supervisors today. Supervisor Jim Desmond complained that the state's rules have changed too often, and businesses are suffering. He asked fellow supervisors to support a proposal for the county to stop enforcing the state's rules. It was rejected. When California unveiled an updated reopening framework last month, 38 of its 58 counties were reported to have widespread virus transmission, which means they have a case rate greater than 7 newly confirmed daily cases per 100,000 residents and/or and infection rate about 8%. They may only offer distance learning in the schools, and most businesses must limit indoor operations. Today, there were 30 counties still in the most restrictive tier, with Inyo, Tehama, and Marin County in the Bay Area the most recent to move out. More counties are expected to be eligible to make the switch next week. San Francisco has had among the lowest rates of any large county for months, but chose to keep many restrictions in place. Today, Mayor London Breed urged residents to continue wearing masks, as the city did allow nail and hair salons, spas, gyms, and other businesses to reopen indoors. She said she doesn't want to reverse course and close businesses again after they've been reopened. California fitness centers filed a lawsuit alleging Governor Gavin Newsom's measures aimed at curbing the spread of the coronavirus unfairly target the industry. They're demanding may be allowed to reopen. The California Fitness Alliance, which represents nearly 300 businesses, filed the suit today in Los Angeles County Superior Court. The suit accuses state and Los Angeles County officials of requiring gyms to close without providing evidence that they contribute to virus outbreaks, and at a time when staying healthy is critical to California residents. A judge today ordered classrooms closed at a private school in California's Central Valley that has defied state and local health orders aimed at slowing the spread of the coronavirus. The ruling marked a legal victory for Fresno County health officials, who had unsuccessfully ordered Emmanuel schools last month to stop in-person instruction. The K-12 Christian school, with about 600 students, reopened its campus on August 13th, saying parents should decide if their children attend school. They also claimed that students had achieved herd immunity based on a sampling of tests done by a parent who was the pathologist. County health officials had argued that the school was threatening the health and safety of students, faculty, and the community, and sued the school, seeking a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction to bar it from holding in-person classes. Superior Court Judge Tyler Tharp granted the injunction today. On August 25th, Judge Tharp had denied the request for a temporary injunction, saying he wanted to hear from both sides at a full hearing. Hospitals in England say a shortage of COVID-19 tests in the UK is jeopardizing medical staffing and preparations for a potential surge in the coronavirus cases there this winter. According to National Health Service Providers, a group that represents hospitals, inadequate testing is leading to increased absences in the National Health Service, as medical workers are forced to self-isolate while they and their family members wait for test results after possible exposures. Holly Hudson reports from London.
National Health Service Providers, which represents hospital trusts in England, say shortages of coronavirus tests are now threatening the running of services, with growing staff absences because so many doctors and nurses are stuck at home having to self-isolate, unable to obtain tests for themselves or their families. It comes amid a deepening crisis in testing availability. There are reports of people having to travel hundreds of miles to get a test, with claims there are none available in any of the top 10 COVID hotspots in England. The government have defended the system, saying capacity is increasing, and ministers are currently planning Operation Moonshot, a mass community coronavirus testing regime. Holly Hudson, London.
An indoor wedding and reception in the state of Maine has been linked to 7 deaths and more than 170 cases of COVID-19. The latest death was reported at the Maple Crest Rehabilitation Center in Madison, where 5 prior deaths were also deemed connected to the August 7th event. The Maine CDC said about 65 people attended the event in violation of Governor Janet Mills's executive order limiting indoor gatherings to 50 people. The wedding ceremony was held at Tri-Town Baptist Church in East Millinocket, about 63 miles north of Bangor. and a reception was held at the Big Moose Inn Cabins and Campground in Millinocket. None of the 7 people who have died attended the wedding or the reception. Church officials have defended their right to hold events despite the public health danger. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online, kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m., right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
San Francisco State Senator Scott Wiener is pushing for SB 855, a bill that would require health insurance companies to cover treatment for all medically necessary mental health and addiction problems. He's pushing for Governor Gavin Newsom to sign the legislation, and if it is signed into law, California would have the strongest mental health parity law in the country. KPFA's Daniel Whitty reports.
Senator Scott Wiener and mental health professionals today held a press conference to urge Governor Gavin Newsom to sign his bill into law. Wiener says the COVID-19 pandemic has only increased the need for expanded mental health support. Currently, only certain mental health issues are covered, but alcohol treatment and certain types of anxiety disorders like post-traumatic stress aren't covered. Supporters of mental health parity say it would mean that mental health would be taken as seriously as physical health under state law.
Insurance companies will frequently refuse to cover care for people suffering from mental health or addiction challenges by saying it's not serious enough.
Besides requiring that all medically necessary mental health treatment be covered, the bill would also lay out what is considered medically necessary. The bill would also require the primary insurer to cover out-of-network treatment. Supporters of SB 855 say that if the bill passes, California will become a national leader on mental health parity. Dr. Arthur Evans is the CEO of the American Psychological Association. He says recent events in the news have increased the need for mental health services in California. Evans explains why this bill is so important.
One of the things that we know is that because of the pandemic, that mental health needs have increased quite significantly. We know also because of the concerns about racial injustice that the needs of many of your citizens have also been increased. The recent wildfires also have increased the mental health needs.
The California Health Association opposes the bill, saying that the current federal and state laws are well established. They also say that California health plans are working to ensure adequate mental health coverage by having laws such as those that require compliance with the Affordable Care Act. They also say that the bill is built on the incorrect belief that enrollees aren't receiving proper mental health and substance abuse treatment, when in fact 99.8% of them do. The bill is now on Governor Newsom's desk. Senator Wiener says Newsom hasn't yet indicated whether he'll sign the bill into law. For KPFA News, I'm Daniel Whitty.
A bill that would grant one-time payments of $600 in the form of prepaid grocery cards for undocumented Californians affected by the economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic is also on Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. KPFA's Chris Lee has that story.
Assemblymember Miguel Santiago introduced the bill back in February. It passed out of the legislature earlier this month. Santiago said he and Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti recently saw firsthand how much immigrant communities are suffering.
Just a few weeks ago, Mayor Garcetti and I stood on the food lines in Koreatown Pico Union, MacArthur Park, where we saw close to 1,500 people. And this is not unique. It's happening everywhere. Get in line and wait for food. The lines were starting to stack up close to about midnight. People are hungry. They just want to eat. And what this bill is a very, very simple bill. All it says is that every adult should have access to a $600 card, $600 gift card. Not a lot we're asking for.
Santiago says undocumented immigrants aren't eligible for services that other California residents have access to, like unemployment insurance or food assistance programs like CalFresh. A 2015 UCLA Labor Studies paper finds that people living in LA's Latino neighborhoods of Westlake and Pico Union earn between $16,000 and $19,000 a year. According to U.S. Census data, that's less than a third of the median income in the city of Los Angeles. That same study also indicates these workers are likely to work long hours or work two jobs just to make ends meet. Limited demographic data on COVID-19 indicates the pandemic is disproportionately impacting California's Latino population. LA Mayor Eric Garcetti says COVID-19 has impacted people unequally, and this bill is really about fairness.
We know that this pandemic lays bare all of the things that are unequal in our society. And as we look at our economy, as we look at racial justice, and as we look at this pandemic and our health, because our federal government wrote out immigrants from assistance, and anybody associated with immigrants were written out too. The American citizen children and spouses of immigrants, all of whom pay taxes, literally were excluded from the same assistance given to their neighbors in the country that they all call home, because of a guilt by association philosophy of our federal government.
Advocates for undocumented immigrants say many of them turn to food banks and school meal programs for food assistance because these programs don't ask about immigration status. Willie Elliott McCrea is CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank in Watsonville. He says his food bank and food banks like his in California have seen a sharp uptick in demand since the pandemic began. He says it's gotten more acute since the $600 weekly federal supplement to unemployment benefits dried up in July.
Since COVID, Second Harvest Food Bank in Santa Cruz County has been feeding twice as many people with 70% more food. That means that the hunger gap in our community is bigger than ever. We know that hunger is deepest amongst the Latinx families who work so hard and who pay taxes but need help due to the extraordinarily high housing costs. And we know that so much more needs to be done. Our communities are counting on all of us now more than ever. And we are counting on Governor Newsom to sign this landmark legislation.
I'm Chris Lee, reporting for KPFA.
Native American environmental activists are urging the U.S. Congress to strengthen federal environmental laws. Antonia Gonzalez reports.
Democratic members of the House Natural Resources Committee are hosting discussions on environmental issues. Last week, they held a virtual environmental justice tour focused on New Mexico. Native advocates say resource extractions have contaminated sacred places and medicines and have had health impacts on people. Leona Morgan, a Navajo grassroots advocate, urged lawmakers to fight proposed nuclear waste storage, continue mine site cleanup, and oppose new resource extractions in the state.
When you're living on stolen land, the colonizer tends to make the rules as they would have them. And so today, some of the impacts we've been living with for decades, for generations actually, and they've only been highlighted because of the recent pandemic. We have not only dealt with the uranium mining, but also coal mining in and around the Navajo Nation, and the contamination to water resources and use of water for extractive industry has really impacted our people.
Legislation was introduced in Congress this summer to seek environmental justice aimed at underserved communities and communities of color. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has posted a picture of himself in a hospital in Germany and says he's breathing now on his own. A German military lab determined that Navalny had been poisoned with the Soviet-era nerve agent Novichok. Julia Chapman reports from Moscow.
In the photo, Alexei Navalny is seen sitting up in his hospital bed, surrounded by his wife and children. The caption reads, "I still can't do almost anything yet, but yesterday I breathed by myself for the whole day." A week ago, German doctors treating the Russian opposition figure said he had emerged from a coma, which he fell into on August 20th. This week, he came off artificial ventilation and started to stand for short periods of time. The New York Times, citing German officials, says Navalny has expressed his intention to return to Russia after his recovery. No criminal investigation has been opened in Russia. Julia Chapman, Moscow.
An immigrant woman who accused guards of sexually assaulting her at a detention center in Texas was deported yesterday, weeks after she was interviewed by investigators. The woman's lawyer, Linda Corchado, told the El Paso Times that the woman was deported to Mexico just under a month after she underwent a 5-hour interview. The woman alleged guards at the El Paso Processing Center forcibly kissed her and targeted her in places where they could not be seen by security cameras. After the Texas Tribune and ProPublica first reported the allegations, the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General opened an investigation into her case and allegations from at least 2 other people. The woman is from Mexico and has 2 American-born children. She is not being identified. Corchado said the woman told the Inspector General and the FBI about the blind spots that guards allegedly used. She remained in the jail afterwards. A World Trade Organization panel ruled today that the Trump administration's tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods are illegal, vindicating Beijing, even if the United States has all but incapacitated the World Trade Organization's ability to hand down a final binding verdict. The decision marks the first time that the Geneva-based trade body has ruled against a series of high-profile tariffs that President Trump's government has imposed on a number of countries, allies and rivals alike. Trump has repeatedly claimed that the WTO treats the U.S. unfairly. The ruling, in theory, would allow China to impose retaliatory tariffs on billions of dollars worth of U.S. goods, but it's unlikely to have much practical impact, at least in the short term, because the U.S. can appeal the decision, and the WTO's appeals court is currently no longer functioning, largely because of the Trump administration's single-handed refusal to accept new members for it. In its decision, the WTO's dispute settlement body ruled against the U.S. government's argument that China has wrongfully engaged in practices harmful to U.S. interests on issues including intellectual property theft and technology transfer. The ruling quickly drew criticism of the U.S. Trade Representative, Robert Lighthizer. Morning clouds tomorrow in the San Francisco Bay Area. It should clear off by the afternoon. Highs in the low 70s around the bay. Further inland, partly cloudy with highs in the mid-80s. In the central San Joaquin Valley tomorrow, sunny with highs in the low 90s. Likewise, sunny and highs in the low 90s in Los Angeles tomorrow. That's it for the news tonight for this Tuesday, September 15th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Miracle. Good evening.
This is a community announcement for September 2020. The Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition calls for a Bike to Wherever Day on Thursday, September 24th. When you register, you can get a Love to Ride app, participate virtually in special events, and enter a drawing for prizes. To register, go to bikesonoma.org. That's bikesonoma.org. This community announcement is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your listing for consideration to KPFA at 1929 Martin Luther King Jr. Way, Berkeley 94704, or email calendar@kpfa.org. To hear this calendar again, call 510-848-6767 extension 621, or view it online at kpfa.org.